Before we begin, please note that viewer discretion is strongly advised. The following is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Imagine being selected for a high-profile trial, thinking it will be a routine process of listening to testimonies and reviewing evidence. But then, the unexpected happens. The jury is called to watch explicit videos that shock even the most seasoned courtroom observers. This was no ordinary day in the Shawn Diddy Combs federal sex trafficking trial. As the trial reached its 24th day, the prosecution made a move that took everyone by surprise. They asked the jury to watch two videos that would forever alter the course of this case. These weren't your typical courtroom exhibits. No, these were hardcore, explicit videos intended to drive home the prosecution's argument about the very nature of the charges against Diddy. The first video was a mere 11 minutes long, a short but gut-wrenching snippet. However, the second video, that one was much more difficult to sit through. A staggering 40 minutes of graphic content, enough to make anyone uncomfortable, let alone a group of jurors already grappling with the weight of the case. The nature of the videos was clear. What the jury was watching was not only explicit but crucial to the government's case. These were not random clips. They were videos that were said to directly involve the people at the center of the trial. According to the prosecution, these videos were proof of a pattern of behavior, one that involved sex trafficking, control, and manipulation. Now, imagine the atmosphere in that courtroom. The lights dimmed, and the jurors, each with a headset on, were forced to sit through the entire thing. The room was heavy with silence, save for the sounds coming through the headphones. And while the jury was supposed to be shielded from the public by these headphones, something went wrong. Some jurors, whether out of discomfort or curiosity, didn't quite seal the headsets properly, and soon enough, the sounds from the video started to leak into the gallery. The moans, the groans, the unmistakable noises of a pornographic video, they were all unmistakably clear. It wasn't just uncomfortable, it was awkward, tense, and downright disturbing. The audience, many of whom were reporters, exchanged glances. You could almost feel the shockwaves ripple through the room as jurors tried to ignore the sound that now bled into the public space. Some jurors were visibly shaken, covering their eyes, turning away, clearly affected by what they were being asked to watch. This wasn't what anyone had signed up for. These weren't just witnesses telling their story on the stand. This was the trial, and the jury was being asked to relive the very horrors they were hearing about. But the shock wasn't over yet. As if the trial wasn't already brimming with drama, another unexpected twist emerged when the name Kanye West was suddenly brought up. Yes, the very same Kanye West who has made headlines more than once for his controversial statements and unpredictable behavior. His name appeared on the list of potential witnesses in the case, sparking immediate interest. What was his role in this case? And more importantly, why was his name mentioned in the first place? For many, the question was never about if Kanye would show up, but rather why he was even considered a potential witness. Kanye, as it turned out, had close ties to Diddy, a fact that only added to the intrigue surrounding his involvement in the trial. The two men had worked together for years, crossing paths in both business and personal circles. Diddy had long been a mentor of sorts to Kanye, guiding him through the music industry's labyrinth of fame, fortune, and conflict. Their relationship was complicated, to say the least, with both men having their fair share of public feuds and reconciliations over the years. So why was Kanye's name suddenly brought up in the trial? Was he supposed to testify about something crucial to the case? Or was his presence simply a strategic move to add more star power to the already high-profile case? The rumors were rampant. Some speculated that Kanye might have been prepared to shed light on Diddy's character, given their history together. Others suggested that he was only listed as a witness for the drama and spectacle his presence would bring to the courtroom. Either way, Kanye's potential involvement raised eyebrows, adding yet another layer of intrigue to an already bizarre situation. But in the end, Kanye never showed up. Despite the initial hype, he was a no-show on the trial's 24th day, and his absence left many to wonder what the real plan had been all along. Was Kanye ever truly going to testify, or was his name just part of the media circus surrounding the trial? Was he simply getting the PR attention he craved, or was there something deeper at play? While Kanye was off the hook, the court had other surprises in store. As the trial progressed, it became clear that the legal fireworks weren't the only things that were about to explode. Day 24 of the Diddy trial brought with it a stunning twist. A juror was unexpectedly dismissed. Juror number 6, a black man who had been part part of the panel from the start, was suddenly removed from the case. The reason? The judge had serious concerns that he had misled the court about his residency during jury selection. It turned out that juror number 6 had failed to fully disclose that he was living part-time with his girlfriend in New Jersey, while officially listing his primary residence as the Bronx. This revelation raised doubts about the integrity of his responses during voir dire, the process where potential jurors are questioned to ensure impartiality. According to the judge, these discrepancies were enough to warrant his removal. The judge's decision was clear: juror number 6 had to go. But the impact of this move was far from straightforward. The removal of a black juror from such a high-profile case instantly raised questions about the fairness of the process. Why was this juror dismissed over what many felt was a relatively minor issue of residency? Was it truly a case of legal integrity, or was something else at play? As the court's decision echoed through the room, a deep racial tension began to simmer. The juror's dismissal didn't just remove an individual, it disrupted the diversity of the jury panel, sparking a firestorm of debate. As the courtroom buzzed with whispers and confusion, the controversy reached a boiling point when the replacement juror was introduced. The new juror, an older white man, was quickly shuffled in to take juror number 6's place. This swap wasn't just a procedural change, it was a symbolic one. The racial implications of replacing a black juror with a white one were immediately apparent, and the media, as well as the public, seized on the moment. Was this racial bias in action? Was the dismissal of the black juror a subtle attempt to shift the trial's dynamic? As the trial's supporters and critics took sides, the incident stoked the flames of racial tension that already surrounded the case. Many questioned whether the integrity of the jury would be compromised by this change and whether the defense would capitalize on this shift to challenge the fairness of the trial. But the drama didn't stop with the juror shuffle. As the trial unfolded, the prosecution dropped a bombshell: hard, irrefutable evidence that tied Diddy directly to the disturbing activities at the heart of the case. Gone were the emotional testimonies and tear-filled accounts of victims. Instead, the jury was presented with cold, hard facts, text messages, digital receipts, and carefully crafted charts that painted a damning portrait of Diddy's alleged criminal empire. It was a methodical, clinical approach that left little room for doubt. The prosecution wasn't just telling a story, they were showing it one message at a time. The first piece of evidence was a detailed chart outlining messages between Diddy's trusted staff. These weren't just casual exchanges. They were revealing conversations that depicted the inner workings of Diddy's operations. The texts between Diddy's chief of staff, his bodyguard, and various assistants were chilling in their matter-of-fact tone. Discussions about drug transactions, covert purchases of marijuana, referred to as flour, were all neatly mapped out in these charts. The name Guido came up frequently, a man identified in earlier testimonies as a well-known drug dealer connected to Diddy's circle. This wasn't just a party lifestyle, it was a calculated network of illegal activities. But the evidence didn't stop at drugs. The chart also revealed messages that coordinated what the prosecution described as freak-off events. These weren't casual encounters. They were planned, organized, and paid for. One text in particular stood out, a message from Diddy's assistant discussing a $5,000 payment for hotel arrangements. This was no longer about individual indiscretions. This was evidence of a larger, orchestrated plan. The prosecution's case was becoming clearer. This was sex trafficking, plain and simple. However, perhaps the most gut-wrenching part of the evidence came in the form of text messages from Cassie Ventura, Diddy's former girlfriend, who had already testified about the abuse she allegedly endured during their relationship. Cassie's texts were direct and harrowing. In one exchange, she confided in Diddy's assistant, expressing fear and pain as she detailed the physical abuse she suffered at his hands. "No one deserves to be dragged by the hair. I locked the door for my safety," one message read. Another text revealed her escalating sense of terror. "I can't do the violent scary anymore." These were not just words. They were a cry for help, a record of abuse that tied Diddy to a pattern of controlling and violent behavior. Cassie's testimony, backed by these texts, painted a terrifying picture of life under Diddy's control. But these weren't just isolated incidents. They were part of a broader, disturbing network of manipulation and exploitation, with Diddy allegedly pulling the strings behind the scenes. As the jury absorbed the chilling evidence, the weight of it all began to settle in. The The digital trail was undeniable. Diddy's name was all over it, texts, calls, even the money transfers. The prosecution was showing the jury a reality that was impossible to ignore. But as if that wasn't enough, things got even darker with the infamous freak-off videos. As the prosecution's case began to unfold, the evidence was damning, but nothing would hit harder than the infamous freak-off videos. These videos weren't just an afterthought. They were the keystone in the prosecution's argument. For weeks, jurors had heard about Diddy's alleged abuse, manipulation, and trafficking. They had seen text messages detailing the operations of a criminal network. But now, the government was putting the final pieces into place, showing the jury the raw footage that supposedly documented the very heart of the accusations. The videos, 2 in total, were more than just evidence. They were the proof that connected Diddy directly to the allegations. One video was relatively short, lasting 11 minutes, but the other, a staggering 40 minutes of explicit content that painted a grim picture of the illicit activities allegedly taking place behind closed doors. The prosecution argued that these videos were not mere personal moments. They were part of a larger system of exploitation and control. The freak-off nights, which the jury had heard about during testimony, were no longer abstract. They were visual, concrete, and chillingly real. The tapes were more than just disturbing. They were the smoking gun that tied Diddy to sex trafficking and abuse in a way that words alone could not. For the jurors, watching these videos was an ordeal none of them had signed up for. The room was thick with tension as the footage played, the jurors forced to sit through graphic content they could not ignore. The videos showed what the prosecution argued were not spontaneous encounters, but orchestrated events with clear financial and logistical backing. This wasn't just about a celebrity's private life, it was about organized, systematic abuse. The videos didn't just depict what happened, they showed the machinery behind it. The prosecution claimed that Diddy wasn't a passive observer but an active participant in these events, facilitating them using his wealth, power, and connections. The reactions from the jury were split, and the emotional impact was palpable. The male jurors, some of whom had seemed unfazed throughout the trial, sat with their eyes glued to the screen, seemingly unaffected by the graphic content. In contrast, the female jurors had a much stronger, visible reaction. One juror, in particular, was seen covering her eyes, unable to watch any longer. It was clear that the gender divide in reactions wasn't just about personal comfort. It was a reflection of the deeper emotional toll this trial was taking on the jurors. For the women, these were not just abstract allegations. They were seeing the harsh reality of the abuse, and it struck a chord. The male jurors, on the other hand, appeared to detach from the discomfort of the material, perhaps focusing on the legal implications more than the emotional weight of the situation. Whether it was a defense mechanism or a simple difference in perspective, the split reactions highlighted the complexity of the case. Was Diddy truly at the center of this scandal, or was this just another case of accusations being magnified in the media? The jury's split reactions didn't just shape their view of the case. They were a microcosm of the larger public debate surrounding Diddy's role in the trial. The videos, now in evidence, were more than just pieces of explicit footage. They were the key to understanding the allegations of sex trafficking, and they were a tool for the prosecution to cement their case. The problem was, even with the visual proof, there was still a great deal of ambiguity. Were these freak-off events just part of Diddy's celebrity lifestyle, or were they the foundation of a much darker criminal organization? But the case isn't just about the videos. It's about the larger criminal organization. As the trial continued to unfold, the prosecution began to paint a darker picture of Shawn, Diddy Combs, not just as a celebrity, but as the alleged mastermind behind a criminal empire. At the heart of the government's case was the concept of racketeering, specifically, how Diddy allegedly used his vast business empire to orchestrate and facilitate illegal activities. Under the RICO Act, racketeer influenced and corrupt organizations, the government argued that Diddy wasn't simply a participant in illicit acts, but the orchestrator of an entire operation that included drug trafficking, sex trafficking, and systematic abuse. Racketeering, in the legal sense, involves using a legitimate business or enterprise to carry out illegal activities. In Diddy's case, the prosecution claimed that his empire, spanning music, fashion, and entertainment, was being used as a cover for illegal activities, some of which were facilitated through his staff and network of associates. The government argued that Diddy's control over his business ventures allowed him to act with near impunity, using his power to coerce, manipulate, and exploit people within his circle. The videos, the texts, the travel itineraries, they weren't just bits of evidence. They were the blueprint of a much larger operation. One of the most chilling aspects of the case was how Diddy allegedly used his closest associates, his staff, to carry out these illegal activities. Key players in Diddy's inner circle, including his longtime chief of staff, Christina KK Courtroom, and his trusted bodyguard, Roger Drock Williams, were allegedly complicit in the operations. These weren't just employees, they were the cogs in Diddy's alleged criminal machine. Text messages, emails, and digital receipts revealed that they weren't passive bystanders. They were actively involved in the logistics of the trafficking network. From arranging travel plans for prostitutes to securing drugs, Diddy's staff seemed to be working on his behalf to facilitate these illegal enterprises. Courtroom, in particular, was a central figure in the government's case. As Diddy's chief of staff, she had access to the most sensitive parts of his operations. The prosecution argued that she wasn't just a secretary. She was part of the inner workings of Diddy's alleged criminal activities. From paying for hotel rooms to coordinating the movement of people and goods, Courtroom's role in the operation was undeniable. The same could be said for Drock, who, as Diddy's head of security, was allegedly involved in moving drugs and coordinating freak-off events. The evidence against Diddy was mounting. It wasn't just that he was a celebrity surrounded by scandal. It was that he allegedly ran an entire network designed to exploit people for sex and drugs, using his empire as a front. The government's case wasn't just about isolated incidents. It was about showing that these events were part of a larger pattern of behavior. And it wasn't just Diddy pulling the strings. His staff, the people closest to him, were allegedly complicit in carrying out the activities that the prosecution claimed amounted to racketeering. While the prosecution ties the dots, the defense is preparing its counterattack. As the prosecution built its case, detailing text messages, charts, and videos that painted Diddy as the orchestrator of a vast criminal operation, the defense team was not going to let the narrative go uncontested. From the moment the trial began, Diddy's legal team worked tirelessly to reframe the story, attempting to cast doubt on the prosecution's evidence and present a different, more benign picture of their client. Their strategy was clear: to challenge the assumption that Diddy was the ringleader of a criminal empire and to argue that any illegal activities were carried out without his knowledge or direct involvement. One of the defense's key tactics was to scrutinize the text messages between Diddy and his accusers. They pounced on the seemingly innocent exchanges, using them as evidence that Diddy wasn't coercing anyone, but rather communicating with former employees or associates in a way that wasn't unusual for someone in his position. For instance, a message Diddy sent to Mia, his former assistant, was presented as proof that he was simply reaching out to someone he trusted for a conversation. "Hey, I don't want to be blowing up your phone. Just need to talk to you for 10 minutes, Diddy wrote in one text. The defense argued that this message was not an attempt to intimidate or manipulate. Rather, it was an example of someone trying to reconnect with a trusted former employee during a difficult time. The defense wasn't just looking at the texts as isolated communications. They used them to argue that these interactions were more about Diddy's personality and his attempt to maintain control over his empire, rather than to enforce any form of coercion. They contended that Diddy was not an abusive monster, but rather someone who sometimes behaved poorly but was not involved in criminal activity in the way the prosecution suggested. These messages, they claimed, were simply part of normal business interactions and personal relationships within his circle. But the defense didn't stop at text messages. They also sought to muddy the waters by introducing the idea that some of the accusers may have had more agency in their actions than the prosecution was letting on. By focusing on moments where the accusers seemed to have some level of control or resistance, the defense attempted to argue that these women were not mere victims of manipulation. Take, for example, the texts between Jane, Diddy's former girlfriend, and his chief of staff, KK. In one exchange, Jane explicitly told KK, "My answer to him is no, and it is still no." The defense seized on this, arguing that it demonstrated Jane had the power to reject Diddy's requests, showing that she wasn't entirely under his control. The defense's strategy was clear: to fracture the prosecution's narrative and create doubt in the minds of the jurors. They painted a picture of Diddy as someone who may have had a complicated, sometimes toxic personal life, but not one that involved criminal exploitation or trafficking. They pointed to instances where the accusers seemed to have exercised free will, implying that the situation was not as straightforward as the prosecution claimed. The stakes are rising, and the trial is nearing its climax. As the trial heads into its final days, the tension in the courtroom is palpable. The jury has been presented with mountains of evidence, from chilling text messages to explicit videos, and both sides have had their say. Yet, the conclusion of this high-stakes case still feels far from certain. The upcoming testimony from a few key witnesses could either make or break the case. The prosecution is expected to call more individuals who could further solidify their narrative of Diddy's involvement in a criminal enterprise. These witnesses, who have already been mentioned in passing, hold critical pieces of the puzzle, and their testimony could provide the final blow to Diddy's defense. But, as compelling as the prosecution's case may be, the defense still has time to strike back. Their strategy of casting doubt on the prosecution's evidence, suggesting that some accusers had more agency than they let on, and questioning the validity of certain key pieces of testimony, still has room to unfold. The next few days will be crucial, as the defense looks to reinforce their argument that Diddy is not the mastermind behind this alleged criminal network. Whether they can convince the jury of his innocence remains to be seen. Despite the buildup of evidence, unanswered questions linger. Can the jury truly separate the facts from the emotional weight of the testimony? Will they be able to sift through the chaos and decide what's real and what's been exaggerated for effect? And perhaps the biggest question of all, will the defense succeed in creating enough doubt to sway the jury? These are questions that only the jury can answer, but the uncertainty surrounding the trial's outcome leaves us on the edge of our seats. As the trial draws to a close, speculation runs rampant. What will the future hold for Diddy? If found guilty, the implications for his career and legacy could be monumental. The very foundation of his public persona, his image as a mogul, philanthropist, and music industry titan, could crumble. The fallout from such a conviction would echo across the entertainment world, and Diddy's place in pop culture history would be forever tainted. But if he walks free, what does that say about the nature of justice, celebrity influence, and the lengths to which the powerful can go to protect their reputation? In the end, this trial is not just about the charges against Diddy. It's about something much larger, the culture of celebrity itself. How far can fame and fortune stretch to protect individuals from accountability? How many layers of power, money, and influence must one have to be shielded from the consequences of their actions? For Diddy, the outcome of this trial will shape not only his personal future, but the future of celebrity justice itself. The jury will soon render its verdict, but the questions this case has raised will linger long after the courtroom doors close. And for Diddy, whether or not he emerges victorious, his legacy may never be the same.